Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Reactionary Grounds here. Your co-host, myself, I'm Big Mac. We got Larry Tyndall. We got Meat Cutter. We got Natty. We got Philippe. And we've got Sam, that's his pseudonym tonight. He's Men with Chests. And we've got Against Degeneracy. He's going to go by AD. So AD and Sam, welcome.
Thank you.
Great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Glad to be here. Thanks.
We're really glad to have you guys. You're our first big guest. Boomer Tech struck a low blow tonight. Power went out. So big frustration. We apologize to our audience out there, whoever's listening. Thank you for tuning in. This one was out of our hands. It really wasn't Boomer Tech, to be honest. It was just the power outage. So that was beyond us. But we did what we could. We're here now. So got a lot to talk about. We're going to go for about an hour. So this is going to go to probably about 10:50 Eastern time tonight because we still want to give it the justice it deserves. Yeah. So, all right. So our first kind of prompt that we had, and just a quick broad context for what this channel is. This channel hopes to be a nexus or a meeting grounds for those on the dissident right, those traditionalists and reactionaries out there who want to try to get into the more practical realm of things, affecting political change through legislation, elections, rallies, town halls, protests, counter-protests, and things of that nature. So, as well as maybe trying to bring some level of cohesion and fraternity amongst our like-minded associates who, right now, our movement is very decentralized. It's very dispersed, and in some ways that affords us benefits because we have anonymity. We're like a multi-headed snake, so it's impossible to basically kill the internet, to silence the internet. And so that's an advantage with meme warfare, totally anonymous. But on the other hand, your average normie is not convinced by us because they don't think there's many of us out there. We can't flex our presence in public. We can't show our numbers. Closest thing we got to doing something like that was Charlottesville. But aside from that, nobody really has any idea how many of us there are. And it's a lot harder for them to feel comfortable with us because they don't see our faces. They don't come into contact with us. They just see these spicy memes. So how can we kind of inject ourselves to some extent to try to bring more normies around to begin to start to make more political progress rather than just staying totally anonymous online? So the first question that we had was, the question of in real life, in the open politics versus online, totally anonymous, amorphous meme warfare. To what extent can we transition into that, into the former? And to what extent should we transition into in real life, kind of on the ground, in the open activism and leadership and pushing political agendas, legislation, etc. So Against Degeneracy and Men with Chests, Sam, what are your guys' thoughts on that?
Men with Chests can start.
Okay. As far as transitioning from meme warfare and networking with like-minded people on the internet into real-world politics and trying to affect change in meat space, well, I think it's kind of at the national level, the federal level, I think it's a lost cause. I think a waste of energy. I think what you should do is organize with like-minded people, form a Männerbund, actually, with like-minded men, maybe with higher testosterone levels, try to avoid the betas, and get together and form a group that looks out for each other, groups that you can depend on one another, help each other, take care of each other's families. First, you have to get a family, so you got to find a wife and make some kids, and then build your community from there. And I think it needs to be based on traditional Christian conservative morality, and from that you can grow something that will actually be effective. But that's a very long-term plan. If you're looking to affect change on the national level in politics in the West, you need millions and millions of dollars. And these people have been waging political and psychological warfare on traditional Christian morality for 200 years. They have it down to a science. They know how to manipulate us. So there's really no going up against them at their game. What we have to do is fight back using the weapons that we've had for millennia, which is forming strong families and getting heaven on our side through prayer and penance and fasting.
All right, let me sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. To answer this question on how we transition from the online world into the real world, I don't think we can really begin to answer this question without first recognizing the importance of the online world and how our presence there is going to be changing very soon. I'm sure everyone here is aware that Facebook released a rule that they've recently removed, but they had a rule up for about a day, which said that you can incite violence on their platform. And this is a huge platform. I mean, about 1 billion people use it every day, literally every day. And you can incite violence against far right people and white nationalists. You could say things like, I'm going to go to Richard Spencer's house and blow his brains out and stuff like that. That was acceptable speech in their eyes. So in order to properly answer this question, I think we need to first understand that we need to win the war on tech censorship, because I don't think any of us here were red pilled through people we talk to in real life. I mean, the most red pilled people I've talked to are priests, and they're all boomers anyway. They don't really know what they're talking about. They're still neocons, or maybe a few of them are paleocons. And then transitioning into the real world, it's very difficult because we have people like the Legion of St. Ambrose, who are 90% of them are probably FBI agents anyway. Organizing real groups, I believe, has to start at the younger level. And I might be saying that because I am part of Generation Z and I have a bias, but I don't think you really could save anything that is within the millennials or the Gen Xers or the boomers. I think we have to focus on the youth and raising a younger generation of far right ideas. I mean, I see groups like the Boy Scouts going away, and I see what kind of effect that's going to have. I mean, I'm an Eagle Scout, and I know that that's probably going to become worthless because you're going to have, these trannies and women with Eagle Scout badges they didn't work for. So I think that's where we need to start going. I think we need to start setting up pro-family groups, pro-masculine, pro-feminine, traditional femininity, traditional masculinity groups. And eventually we'll just start seeing the culture slowly start to switch, because these leftist ideas will naturally die off with the people that hold them.
All right.
Yeah, right on. Did you want to say something, Larry, there?
So, sorry.
Did you want to say something, Larry? I think you tried to interject a minute ago.
Oh, yes. Yeah, sorry, I interjected before AD got a chance to speak. So I guess I wanted to play devil's advocate kind of on both of your guys' points. So some people might say that your suggested approaches are a bit passive in the sense, we'll kind of create our own enclaves. We will surround ourselves with like-minded people, and the implicit assumption is that we will be able to gain power kind of by default and insulate ourselves from hostile elements. A pessimistic person might say, well, that won't work. We will just kind of wither away into oblivion and become kind of a parody of ourselves, a kind of like right-wing, like far-right Amish or something like that. So how would you respond to people making that kind of criticism?
Well, I think it's a fair criticism. I think they're right to a degree. I mean, to be honest with you, I think that the Western civilization, the civilization that Europeans built, is undergoing a kind of epic downfall. I think we're cursed because we forgot the faith of our ancestors, and that's why we're withering away. So your only hope for a fulfilling and meaningful life and to gain some sort of influence and control over your surroundings is to cling to the traditions and the faith of your ancestors and live as righteously as possible and connect with people who are doing the same. I mean, if I got into the ideas and the hope of building like a Imperium Europa and all that kind of stuff that was floating around 4 or 5 years ago. It's a pipe dream, man. The people who built the last Imperium were of a totally different character and type than we are. We've been bred into amoral, hapless, degenerate people, and that's well over 90% of us. I mean, have you looked around you lately? I mean, even myself, I have these ideas in my head and I agree with them and I'm working on myself, but I mean, I'm the type of person that could have, fought at the Battle of the Bulge or something like that. I mean, maybe I would have risen to the occasion, but you kind of understand what I'm saying. We're a totally different breed. We've been engineered socially to be degenerate, and we're not going to recapture the civilization. It's going to crumble around us. So we just have to do what we can in spite of that. Black pill.
Okay.
Yeah, as a sort of
good
retort to the devil's advocate that you were playing, I would just say that look at how any civilization has started. It didn't really start. I mean, some of them have, but it mostly started because like-minded people came together and they agreed on a common culture. And regardless of what people might think, we all still intrinsically understand these cultural and religious values, even if we've become so separated from them in our current state. So I think if we were to start setting up these organizations like the Knights of St. George or something, or the Knights of Columbus or something like that, especially for younger people, I have a feeling we would start to see these issues become salient again. Ideas like one homogenous people, ideas like some sort of racial solidarity and Christian and Catholic solidarity as well. Because all of these things are true. I mean, we know them to be true. And it takes an intense, sometimes 12 to, I mean, even into college, it's a constant manipulation that no, race isn't real unless, of course, you're white and you're oppressing people of other races. No, Christianity isn't true, and all of these things that we're taught. It's a manipulative process, and anything that requires so much social conditioning cannot possibly be true. It's in our nature. We know these things are true. So I think we just need groups that are awakening that in people.
All right. Big Mac, do we have time for one more rebuttal, or should we move on?
Well, I don't have kind of a rebuttal, but maybe Natty or Philippe or Meat Cutter wanted to interject something. Yeah, I'd say maybe one more rebuttal. We got time for that because we only got 3 major topics here.
All right. Anyone?
All right. Yeah.
Anything else?
Yeah. I'm not chime in. You keep. It's not really a challenge, but it's a genuine question. How do you propose that we go about forming communities? Or here, tell you what, I'll pose it like this: what is the end goal of these communities? Is it to revive the culture? Is it to survive the wave of degeneracy that will sweep over us, and then we can rise like a phoenix out from the ashes? Is it survival or is it revival? What is the end goal of these communities that we want to form?
I would say probably a mixture of both. I don't fully agree with the idea that the United States is doomed to die in this state. I think it has potential to be saved. Granted, if it's left on its current path, it totally will just fall into decadence and destruction like Weimar. However, if we could spread a message amongst the youth and amongst anyone who's willing to listen, and we grow powerful enough, then sure, I don't see why we can't preserve what's already here. And if not, well, then we just have to preserve each other for when whatever climactic event happens, and then survive past it. So I would just say a mixture of both of what you said.
Yeah, man. This is Sam from Men with Chests. In answer to your question, yeah, these communities, the first point of them would be to survive the wave of degeneracy. But this wave of degeneracy doesn't only threaten our livelihood and our material civilization; it threatens the fate of our eternal souls.
Yeah.
You invited a traditional Catholic type of guy on here, so I'm going to talk about that kind of stuff. So that's what it's for. If you surround yourself with degenerate people, or you are surrounded by degenerate people, it's a lot harder to maintain any kind of righteous purity in your soul. So surrounding yourself with like-minded people who believe in God and believe in right and wrong and the traditional faith of our ancestors is going to give you a better chance at not being damned to hell. That's first and foremost. And that's the ultimate goal of life and civilization, is not being damned to hell, and trying to get as many people as possible to not end up there either. So that's step one. for anything, including these manor buns we're talking about. And then step 2, survive the material wave of degeneracy. And then hopefully, if we have enough of these communities that preserve the goodness of Christendom, of Christian civilization that's in its death throes right now, we can be reborn like a phoenix out of the ashes. It would take some time, unless there was some kind of miracle or something. But yeah, that would be the long-term goal for sure.
All right, good deal.
Yeah, interesting.
Right. There's a famous man from history who said when the goddess of fortune wafts on by, you must grab her by the hem. We won't tell you who said that, but there was a historical figure who did. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess as much as I absolutely agree with the point that we need to build and form communities, which is actually going to be our third kind of topic, was how to build a parallel society in politics, which can gradually displace the current depraved politics and culture. But yeah, I mean, to kind of get into that question, I guess a little bit, I suppose rather to take a step back, actually, with the in real life question and the kind of the things like rallies and counter protesting and town halls, kind of trying to use the MAGA brand big umbrella to kind of brush shoulders with more normie types who aren't used to our ideas. I feel like there is kind of like what Larry was saying about the just taking advantage of the opportunity that's before us. That we as much as there is indoctrination and people are captivated by the wrong ideas in the older generations. I think it was it AD that was saying that about how the older generations are lost. We need to focus on the younger generations.
Yeah, that was my main point.
Yeah,
right. And I agree with that. But at the same time, there's clearly things are kind of tottering at a bit at the moment, because we've reached a level of absurdity that makes it clear that we kind of went down a wrong path somewhere, and people are searching for a more true and real alternative. And I mean, Trump is a good indication that that the establishments, in many ways, I mean, he's maybe in some ways he's kind of
establishment himself. I get what you're saying.
Right, but in many ways as well, his election and so forth shows that obviously the skepticism with the establishment and the discontent is at an all-time high. And so basically they are in many ways losing their grip. We got our foot in the door, sort of, with the establishment, where we have kind of potentially an opening to take them when they're weak, to take them when everybody's critical and skeptical of them, and all these scandals are coming out, and just the degeneracy and so forth is clear. It's kind of like a vacuum is forming. Like the establishment is losing the grasp on their legitimate position of power, and so it's kind of a little bit ambiguous right now. Where do we go from here? Who's going to be the real leadership going forward? Who's going to be the real legitimate leadership? There's kind of a vacuum, and I feel like somebody's going to fill that vacuum politically, and we could potentially be the ones to our broad movement of traditionalist reactionaries, realists, whatever you want to call us. We could inject ourselves to some extent to take advantage of that. We have done that with the meme warfare to a large extent, but there are intelligent, prudent, savvy ways to brush shoulders with people in real life. You just have to avoid a couple basic terms that make you into pariah. Don't call yourself like a white nationalist. Don't call yourself, just don't use a few buzzwords. I call myself an American nationalist. And just like how Fuentes does it, he walks the line pretty well. He avoids a few buzzwords. You could say that he maybe loses a tiny bit in authenticity because he won't, just outright say that kind of thing. But what he gains in capital, I'd say, it far outweighs it, because he's not nearly as much of a pariah as Spencer was, for instance. He's not. Well, it's partly because Spencer, he put himself physically out in the open at these rallies, and so he made himself more of a figurehead that was just asking to be attacked by the media. But I think it also has to do with a little bit of prudence in the terms that you pick. I mean, because if you listen to Fuentes for a while, he calls himself an American nationalist, but you listen to him for a while and you understand that, well, okay, what it means to be an American nationalist is to have a heavily favor and to heavily angle toward European immigration. Basically 90% or above. If you look back at the immigration policies of the past, and if you look back at our founding and whatnot, you understand that it's essentially a white nation. That's not to say that there's not room for, a few percentages of people that aren't from Europe, minorities. And that's where maybe there's a little bit of room for the civic nationalist aspect, where, we can go beyond the ethnic nationalist realm and say, okay, maybe there are some candidates who truly can conform or truly can assimilate. And if they come here in good faith and so forth, and as long as it's kept in small numbers, they will assimilate because they don't see that they are rising to a position to maybe overthrow what's already here. If they're kept in small numbers and so forth. But basically, there may be an opening here if we have a little bit of prudence and avoid certain buzzwords to kind of, go to these big tent MAGA rallies or start town halls using just, innocuous brands like MAGA, fairly innocuous mainstream brands, to come into contact with normies and present ourselves in as optical of a way as we can, while still getting into things like race realism. You can still get into things like that. You can still get into the immigration question. And eventually, when you work people over enough, you can maybe get into other certain questions. But
so maybe we'll. Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
Finish your thought. I was
That's pretty much it. Yeah.
I was going to use a prompt for a question for our guests.
Yes.
So this has been kind of a hotly contested issue as of late, post kind of Trump hysteria or Trump victory hysteria. There came the pressing question of do we try to portray ourselves as kind of palatable and optical or whatever, or is optics and kind of the American nationalist approach, is that paradoxical in itself? Is that a tenable approach, or is it doomed to fail? And if not, what is the alternative?
And if I could interject one more thought, and maybe you can answer both these at the same time before I forget to say it, is that the importance of interjecting ourselves into real politics to some extent, getting out physically in the open and talking with people like normies, is not because we hope to try to convert the many people that are just totally indoctrinated and totally lost causes in the different generations. It is to bring ourselves to the attention of the many people who are open to what we're saying, who are more true critical thinkers and willing to consider things. But the problem that we have is that because of censorship and so forth, and just because honestly these rabbit holes can be hard to find. I mean, I got lucky that I kind of stumbled down the rabbit hole as early as I did. People just don't know where to look. Your average boomer who might even be willing to think about what we're saying and come around. There are a lot of people out there who are sympathetic with these kinds of ideas ultimately, but they just, if you're not very tech savvy and you haven't kind of essentially gotten lucky and just happened to browse upon something that was the right, entry point, you're just not going to come into contact with this community of people. It's not mainstream enough. So we have to kind of reach out to a lot of people who are afraid to open up themselves because they don't know who might, be willing to agree with them or just attack them. But we need to show to these people that are out there, there are a lot of people that are not as savvy, that haven't gone down these rabbit holes or found these communities, who want to be a part of what we're doing, but they don't know where to turn to. So we need to kind of come to them to show them that our community exists, because the mainstream media is trying to hide us as best they can. So we have to find ways in real life to get around that. And it does come back to the community thing, but it could also be things at rallies, at town halls and counter protests and things. But yeah, speak to that, I guess, if you don't mind, as well as what Larry was saying, gentlemen.
Yeah, sure. I'll answer Larry's question first. So basically the question was, is there utility in using quotes or names like American nationalist and trying to maintain some sense of optics? And I would say that yes, in fact, that is incredibly important. We were talking about before the show the various uses of the various arguments. I mean, logos, pathos, ethos, and we all agree unanimously that pathos is easily the most effective. Preying on people's emotions rather than trying to use logical reasoning with them tends to be the most effective method. Because we all know that most people are NPCs. Most people are not constantly thinking on a rational basis. And I think this is where a lot of libertarians and anarcho-capitalists kind of get wrong. I mean, heck, if you want to look at someone like Ben Shapiro, for example, people don't really even look at him for arguments. They look at him because he's kind of a showman. He goes and picks low-hanging fruit and just verbally beats the crap out of them. And even though we know he's just a shill and stuff like that, he still is effective at utilizing a presentable and optical approach. In the same way, we have to do that. We have to play on people's emotions, play on people's inner thoughts and ideas, and just put words to them while also looking good. I mean, one of the reasons that things like Richard Spencer and stuff like that fail is because he had stuff like Heilgate, for example. When people see you hailing Hitler or doing the Roman salute, it doesn't look good. They don't want to be associated with that, even if they agree with what you're saying intrinsically. So coming out and saying, yes, I'm an American nationalist, I mean, anyone who really looks into American nationalism knows what that means. If you really need a detailed description of what the United States is supposed to be, just read Federalist Paper number 2. We do need to approach things optically, and I think that calling yourselves American nationalists and infiltrating the Republican Party under that sort of light, changing the things back around to paleo-conservatism is the way to do that.
Right, and Sam, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that I'm sort of on the same page with E. Michael Jones on this question, obviously being a traditionalist Catholic, but I used to disagree with him. He basically says that white American is a manufactured identity, manufactured by the oligarchs specifically to control us. And I tend to agree with him, not in so much. I'm not trying to say that there's no such thing as a white American. I mean, obviously those people exist, but it's because we had our traditional ethnic identities destroyed by neighborhood busting back in the 50s and 60s, destroyed by the Northern troops when they invaded the South and destroyed everything in the 1800s. And so we became just these low melanin European descendants living out in the suburbs with no real connection to our history. So it's not really something you can rally people around. The identity of being a white American is not that exciting. Now, if people had a strong connection to their ethnic identity, as in they were Irish or German or Polish or Italian or something like that, that has a real something meaty to it, some teeth to it. There's a history there. There's a common identity and ancestry, a common ideology and religion that you can rally people around. And this is a real identity that had developed organically for centuries. And the white American is less than a century old, and it's really a dead end. There's not going to be a white nationalist civilization in the continental United States. It's frankly an abhorrent idea to probably, I don't know, well over 70% of European Americans. I just think that they would think that it's absurd, And then what could you rally them around? The idea of the founding fathers of the United States of America, the idea of liberalism that they brought in via the philosophy of John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. That stuff is baked into the cake with the problems and the flaws that led us to where we are now. People believe in libertarianism on a fundamental level, which is why generally they're okay enough with open borders not to really do anything about it, because they feel like human beings fundamentally have a right to move wherever they want. I mean, they get a little irritated about it, but ultimately it goes back to the founding philosophies of our country. They don't have an idea of like, oh, I'm a white American, leave it to Beaver, Gunsmoke, the apple pie. We have to keep these people out. I mean, they get a little bit of that, but it's not enough to actually do much. They just sit on their couch and complain about it and vote for Donald Trump.
Well.
So I just don't think there's any teeth to it.
Well, actually, I do agree with Sam in what he's saying. I do disagree with the liberal and Enlightenment principles. But in terms of just raw pragmatism of what should we do right now, I do think that the American nationalist label has some benefit, because just on its face, you have all these boomers who, yeah, are the, the flag and Bible thumping sort of people. So saying, "Oh, I'm an American nationalist," they go like, "Oh, American? Well, I'm an American," and so they start falling in line with that idea. I think that just using these labels, even if they're not entirely true with what we actually believe, are beneficial to some extent.
Well, let me push back against both
Yeah.
of you guys for a bit and try to poke, try to pick your brain a bit, pick your brains. So a lot of people might make the following a couple parallel sort of arguments, but the gist of the argument would be something like this. So in the eyes of the new residents of Europe or the new residents of South Texas or whatever, there is no distinction between a Serbian American, an Italian American, a Scandinavian American. They would it's not like they're dumb. They understand that in between each other, as far as their interrelations go, they might perceive distinctions between each other, but they do not distinguish between those various groups. And you can see this kind of concept at play in the sense that you have, a Black caucus, a Hispanic caucus, an Asian caucus, but you do not have a Slavic caucus, for instance, or an Irish caucus. So there does seem to be some sense in which racial realism plays out politically, and a strong racial realist would cite examples such as this. So what would you guys say to that?
Yeah, so basically what you're saying is the people coming in from the Middle East and North Africa, when they see someone from Scandinavia or France or England, a native to those lands, they just see them as white people. They don't see them as their nationalities. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that would be the weakest version that I'm saying. The strongest version would be that even in the U.S. you see people coalesce in terms of like caucuses, etc., in terms of political lobbying along racial lines. You have the kind of like pro Latino groups, pro East Asian groups, pro Black African American groups, etc. And it seems like the battle lines are drawn along something that goes deeper than ethnicity, language, etc., but really encompasses a broader geographic and historical, a broader geographic region and a larger historical epoch than just ethnicity. In the sense, just as I said, there isn't an Irish action group, a Serbian
used to be
separatist. There used to be indeed, but right now there's not. Yeah.
Those ethnic groups were targeted for destruction successfully. But I mean, I'm not saying there isn't anything to there being a white America. I just don't think that I think it's a very shallow identity. I don't think there's enough there to really unite the population around.
Okay. All right. So you think
the United States is kind of a unique example for the reasons that you mentioned exactly. I mean, Poland, Yugoslavia, all these places have Germany, France, all these places have very distinct identities that go back thousands of years, and the United States doesn't have that. The United States has always been kind of an Amerimut nation, in the sense that, yeah, when we first came here, people kind of kept to themselves. You had little Polish communities, little French communities, little British communities, but that identity was kind of destroyed with just intermixing between all those groups. And I think that was in part because of our distinct racial diversity in terms of, we always had blacks here as slaves. And so identity is partly defined by enemies. When you look at someone who's like a Somalian, there is so much that you have in difference with that person that you don't even notice how different you are to like a Pole if you're a German, or to a Frenchman if you're a German. Right. Those differences pale into the comparison that you have in difference with, a Muslim from Africa or from the Middle East. And so I do think that a sort of white consciousness that crosses the barriers of these smaller ethnicities is possible only in the United States, I would say, because it would be more difficult for excuse me, for British and Frenchmen to get along when they know their histories with each other. Now, I wouldn't say that it's impossible for them to be allies. Obviously, it's incredibly possible for that. But I don't think you could enable some sort of white consciousness in Europe, nor would I want to. I think that the cultural differences between those groups are fine.
Well, white people in America are filled with hate, and we're told over and over again by the left-wing media, right? But really, they're filled with hate against one another. Like the white, swipple, upper-class people hate white people who live in the mountains, and the white hipsters in Colorado hate white Southerners who live in Germany, or I'm sorry, Georgia, excuse me. There's
Well,
a
they do
lot
hate
of
the Germans
internecine
too. I mean,
conflict among white Americans. Pardon?
so they do hate the Germans too. I mean, if you've ever played a Call of Duty
Yeah,
game, I'm pretty sure you would.
they definitely hate the Germans. Yeah, the ultimate bad guy, the German. But
Evil mustache
yeah,
man.
that's right. But yeah, I just white people in America are a very divided group. I mean, black people vote like well over 90% for the Democrats. So do Hispanic people. They're very united people, whereas white people are basically 50-50 as far as politics go. And no people in New York City hate except everybody except for white people who disagree with them politically. They hate their guts. And that, I think, that goes back to class divisions from ancient Anglo Empire. Honestly, they enslaved the Irish and brought them over here, and so it just goes back to people who came over from Britain hating people who came over from Ireland to be their workers, and it just developed.
Well, that's
there.
the thing.
But, as far as uniting as a white consciousness, I mean, on a nationwide level, that's a pie in the sky idea.
Well, here's the thing. I only think that this intense hatred exists with the current social engineering that we have in place, with this constant indoctrination through media, through social media, and through education that we have. If you take a look at the political differences between groups in the United States' early history, it was basically just like small quibbles with each other. Like, for example, you had the main political parties were divided because one believed that unions should exist to a little bit of a larger extent than the other. And one believed that maybe the central government should have a little bit more power than the other. It was mostly, in relative to now, completely small and trivial differences that separate the political parties because people had a common identity. People were Protestant, which I know is not the best, but people at least had a shared and common identity. People were mostly Anglo-Saxon or at least white. They had a common religion, and they had a common language, and all of that, and they had a common history. They were all frontiersmen. They all set up this new society. So I think that while I agree with you that right now, yeah, we have a group that hates each other, hates themselves, and hates each other. I think that would slowly start to go away if we started to remove these manipulative tactics and the people propagating them. We would see that would slowly start to change.
Sure. I mean, I yes,
go
please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, if we were somehow able to form a type of government that rhymes with what's machist government, maybe a military junta in the United States, and like storm all the movie studios and remove the people in charge there and populate them with Scandinavians, and then shut down Wall Street and nationalize the currency and take over the news media and the school curriculum. If we were able to do all these things and properly propagandize white Americans, I guess, then maybe we could form some sort of common identity and get everybody to stop hating each other. But I do think there's a lot of social engineering that causes that hatred, but I don't think that's the only reason. I mean, there's been internecine hatreds between Europeans going back for centuries and centuries, and those hatreds exist here because they last for generations. Even if people forget the reasons for them, the hatred still remains, and we can see that.
Oh no, I
mean,
certainly agree with you.
Yeah, people who live in Appalachia are descendant of Irish slaves, and the people who live in New York, the upper class wasps are the descendants of the people who enslaved them, and they still hate each other for roughly the same reasons.
I certainly agree
As
with
an
you on
example.
that. I just think that it probably I don't believe that it would reach European levels simply because of how, I mean, every white person you come across in the United States is some sort of European mutt. I don't think anyone's like a pure Brit or a pure Pole or a pure Frenchman anymore. So while I agree with you that we probably still will have these sort of I guess purity spiral problems, I don't think it would really be as severe of a problem if we had a white majoritarian in the United States. I don't think most people would go day to day. And even if they did, they would probably just did what they did in the founding of the United States while it was still colonies. They would probably just stick with their own little groups. Like someone would go to a Polish Catholic church and someone would go to some proddy garbage or whatever if they were British or French. But I still think that the United States would still function in a coherent manner.
Even if you use the term American nationalist, like you're talking about, I mean, to a lot of people's ears, that's not a white thing. I mean, they're like, that, American means everybody as long as they believe in the founding ideals of America. And, a huge percentage of white Americans, that's what they believe, and, I just don't see it changing their minds. They're married to that idea. Even among the younger generations, I mean, I know that there's a stronger contingent of radical conservatives amongst Zoomers, but it's not a majority. I mean, there's just
by no means, no.
Strong contingent of radical leftists, probably larger among Zoomers.
No, yeah, for sure.
Anyone from Reactionary Grounds have anything to add?
Yeah, I'd like to hear from. I definitely would like to hear. I'm sure Philippe and Meat Cutter have got some maybe thoughts to contribute here at this point. So, and Natty absolutely as well. But I feel like Philippe and Meat Cutter might be holding back some thoughts up till now. So, you guys, please speak up if you got anything to say. Go for it, Natty.
Well, okay, yeah. If Meat Cutter's not going to go, kind of, rending the discussion back towards the building of community and how we're going to survive all this. I don't know, degeneracy or whatever, whatever you want to call it, pandemonium. Do you think that the powers that be, the elites, the big tech companies, well, I don't want to say their name, but do you think that they will allow us to form these communities? What you're talking about, like even this type of platform, who know, it's only a matter of time before it catches the eyes of the powers that be at YouTube or Google. How much viability is there in forming smaller communities if we don't control any of the reins of power in society? And that includes things like entertainment, the news organization, which includes social media, the schools, politics. Politics has always been kind of 50-50, but even then we're fast losing that in terms of demographics. How much viability do you think we have in forming these small communities?
Well,
to discuss, all these things that you're talking about, because my big fear is that these ideas are going to die out.
Yeah, I definitely share that concern. And I don't know if you guys have ever read the book Bowling Alone. I've read a little bit of it, and I have a pretty good summary of it.
Yeah, it's an excellent book, yeah.
But the basic message of that book is that culture doesn't really become salient when people are by themselves. I mean, I don't know how many groups everyone in this particular live stream is a part of, but I imagine that for the most part, we're mostly reclusive. At least that's something I've noticed in my own interactions with people online, is that people who have these ideas, they don't really like to leave their house. Because, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's blackpilling. When I go to the mall and see pride flags everywhere, I really don't want to go out anymore. But I believe that these groups are probably not going to be paid attention to for the most part, because there's still already traditional groups like Knights of Columbus that are very far reaching that haven't been shut down yet. I mean, yeah, they've gotten some bad press, but no one's really come gunning for them yet. I think Boy Scouts is really the only one that kind of cucked, and that was its own fault. If you paid attention to the politics behind that, I think that as long as we start going into groups, creating our own and infiltrating paused ones, I think that eventually we'll become a force powerful enough to where we can resist the grips of Hollywood, the grips of the media and stuff like that.
Where do you think we should start?
Yeah, good.
I think starting with young people is probably the best.
Okay, yeah, what you were saying earlier, yeah.
Because the Covington kids was a pretty good example of something that was just explicitly anti-white and anti-Christian, and just look at how much that opened the conversation for those issues. If we had a bunch of groups like the Covington kids that were experiencing the same reactions from the media, I mean, you would have every white American talking about, well, why are we hated? And every Christian talking about, wow, this really is a problem in our media, that we have an anti-Christian media. That would be kind of my game plan.
It's so weird. I wonder why the media is so anti-Christian. Is that some sort of ideology that rejects Christ as the Messiah and control of the media? I don't know.
They really seem to like to crucify this idea of
it.
Christianity. I don't know, man.
Right.
It's strange. Somebody should do some research into that issue.
Yeah. Almost like they're ganging up against us, as if like there was some tribe ganging up against us, trying to destroy us.
Yeah. Sounds like a conspiracy theory to me. Are you one of those tinfoil hat nut jobs?
What's a tribe? I don't think tribes exist, bro. I don't know what you're talking about. Tribes aren't.
I believe everything the government tells me. I don't.
Hey, Natty, what was?
I don't
what
deviate
was
from anything.
Sorry, what was that?
What was the question you asked? Yeah, what was the question you asked? Can you summarize that? I wanted to answer it.
Oh gosh, what was the question? How viable do you think it is for us to form our own communities without the elites coming after us and squashing it down? And then the follow-up question was, what groups do you think we should start? Obviously, we should start forming communities on our own, but in terms of infiltration, how do you see that happening? What should we start with?
Yeah. Have y'all ever, I'm sure some of you have listened to the Myth of the 20th Century podcast. Well, anyway, they had an episode recently with, I guess he's more or less a peak oil guy. And I don't know about peak oil, but I do think that our ability to continue to build and grow in the way that we have been over the last 100 years is winding down. So that's the good news. I think that the tech oligarchs, the technocrats, have bigger issues to deal with than small traditional communities. So basically, you have to form families and then groups and just be a man and assert traditional ideas in those groups. And if other ideas come in, be smart enough and bold enough to challenge them effectively. Because if you believe in traditional Christianity and traditional ways of living, traditional morality, you have the truth on your side, and the truth will defeat bullshit lies from Hollywood and whatever. And then just don't let your kids watch garbage media, and if your wife or whoever you end up marrying tries to get them to watch it, tell them no, not to be a dick about it, but just be firm. That's the key to establishing purity and morality in your home and in your community. You just have to be a man about it. And then as far as groups we should join, I think groups like Knights of Columbus are good. Those are mostly old people, so they could use some young blood infusion, and then you can, get your ideas influenced in there. Groups like that. I mean, fraternal orders abound all around. You just need to find, and they're good ways to connect with people in your community, and then you can influence them with your ideas, because Christian guys are very amenable to traditional morality and traditional Christianity. They just don't hear very often. They feel like they're alone, and they just have to go along with the culture, go along to get along. So people are very open to that. You just have to start speaking the truth, and stop I guess.
To add on to that, I have some experiences. I was a catechist teacher for a long time. I had to quit this year, unfortunately, but I am pretty young. But they are looking for traditionally minded people. and the kids are always very receptive to it. I mean, I remember I did just a small poll of classes, and the younger the kids were, I would ask them just one question. I would say, do you want to have kids when you're like 30? You know, when you're your parents' age, can you imagine yourself having children? And all the kids raised their hand, going from grades, 1 through 5. But once it got to 6, 7, and 8, you saw that those hands started to diminish. And I would always ask, like, well, why are you changing your minds? And it's because of the stuff they heard in schools. I mean, some of them would straight up tell me, yeah, my teachers told me not to have kids. And as I started to preach more traditional things, I was getting offered like to become the director of catechism for my little church. And I'm like, okay, well, wow, that's a pretty big honor, but I'm only, well, I'm not gonna say my age, but when I'm pretty young, I don't think I should take on that responsibility. But yeah, I think that starting with the kids, and maybe even like Menwich has a saying, re-energizing even some of the older folks. I don't think that's completely hopeless. I think that's where we should look to.
Yeah.
All right. Good answers. Good answers.
I agree with the reaching out to the kids, possibly re-energizing boomers. Or I'm not one for boomers, but you got to be accepting of the old folks, right? But along with that, I think building the small communities. I think, well, whoever proposed the Knights of Columbus, I think the KFC is a good organization, but I think groups like the Society of St. Pius X, they've been doing a lot in regards to building very traditional and Catholic communities. I think, along with religion, and some people might cringe at the notion, but I think there's a big part with traditional Catholicism, a big joining of traditional Catholicism and other traditional Christian groups like the Orthodox faith, and also race. I think moving both, I think they're like intertwined in that regard. I think with the development of one, you can have the development of other. And I think working with developing both race and religion, you can use that effectively, and then use different things that happen to shift the Overton window. And that's something that I and Larry had talked about the other day, is what sort of events can we take to use that will help shift the Overton window. And nowadays, it's been, in my opinion, it's been a lot more of things to do with race than religion. But yeah, I mean, with the kids at the DC, you definitely saw that it was both anti-Christian sentiment, but much more a racial sentiment. And for the average American, also, as you discussed, given the fact how America was founded and the general culture, most people, or many, I would say many whites, may not really care about their race. But once there are certain events that happen, obviously we don't want it to get too bad to the point that we can't do anything about it. But I think a big thing that we should be doing is utilizing those events to help to maximize the effect that it has on the Overton window, pushing people that used to not really care about, being white, to like see the actual problems in this regard.
I see exactly what you're saying.
If we were left to our
I
own
think that
devices, go ahead.
No, I'll let you go. I don't want to get the first bite.
Yeah,
every
if
time.
we were left to our own devices, I mean, people would naturally coalesce around communities with people who are like them. I mean, people would hang out with people of their own ethnic group, and not hate other ethnic groups. I don't think there's this natural hatred between ethnic groups. There are differences, and you don't want to like mix everybody up together, because that causes unnecessary conflict. But the reason why there's all this ethnic tension is because of the basically oligarch manipulation. They're doing it. They want this multicultural gray goo society of people who just shop at Walmart and watch Marvel cape shit and have no connection to their history, right? That's what they want. That's why they're doing this to us. But if they weren't there and manipulating stuff, people would be in their own communities, and they would look like ethnic conclaves, but people wouldn't think about it like that. It would just be like, oh, I'm just living with people who are like me, you know? So, I mean, we have to think about who's doing this to us and why. And I know people just want to blame the JQ on the whole thing, but that's not the big picture. The oligarchs and the controllers are not made up of one ethnic group.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree with Men with Chess completely.
Yeah, that's what it is. So if we could deal with that problem, a lot of this other stuff would just, I mean, it wouldn't really even be an issue. That's the main reason why we're having our problems.
Yeah, I agree with.
I mean, when I go out in the world, I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but when I go out in the real world, I mean, I live in a multicultural city, and I interact with people with different ethnicities, and they don't hate me, and I don't hate them. And I mean, I know that there are issues with living in close proximity with other ethnic groups, but on the whole, it's not that bad. But when you get in the media and watch TV, I mean, they stoke those tensions because they're manipulating us. They're trying to get us to, you know, it's about stoking passions and anger and hatred, because they feed on that shit. They can use it to manipulate us. So the problem is what's at the head, more than anything.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with Men with Chess completely on that. And I have similar experiences when I go and I interact with people of different races. There isn't that hatred or anything like that. I mean, I don't think any of us really just goes out wanting to punch minorities or anything like that. But there's still that understanding. I mean, I had a black guy I was pretty close to in high school, and there was always that understanding. It's like, yeah, we're still different. I mean, I will never be as close to you as members of your own community are. And he acknowledged that about me. But in terms of utilizing the question that Natty had, how do we utilize big events that happen to our advantage? The Covington kids is a pretty good example of this, in which there was just blatant anti-white, anti-Christian messaging. I mean, they were upset because this white kid didn't move out of the way for a Native American. They were upset that he didn't bow down to the black Israelites. That was the main point of the message. The fact that he was Catholic made it all the worse. Another good example of something that's upcoming is the Jeffrey Epstein case. The fact that this is being, reported on by the media shows to the average person that, hey, maybe this kind of Pizzagate type conspiracy theory, this Hollywood pedophile cabal, has some truth to it. And if Jeffrey Epstein, I just read an article recently that he might start naming names for a plea deal. If Jeffrey Epstein starts naming people that are pretty big in the Hollywood industry, the big directors like Quentin Tarantino and stuff like that, and all the actors and actresses, as well as people in the news media, I mean, this is going to wake the average person up to what's going on.
I was going to say, we do need to, going along with what Philippe was saying, and y'all are going on here about getting at the root of the problem, going to the top where all of the degeneracy is kind of foisted upon us, and that whole agenda is trickles down from. Yeah, Epstein is a great case. I mean, because this is a lot more appealing to the normies who don't want to get into the racial stuff. Any edified Catholic or Christian can see that there's something horrible about these, just the abuse of the most innocent among us, and especially if you get into the Pizzagate stuff, where it's got the overt demonic aspect, the satanic aspect. I mean, this, as far as getting at the root and using events to shift the Overton window and to chip away at the establishment's grasp, this is ideal because it is appealing to anybody who is at least slightly normal in the head, who's got some semblance of Christianity left in them. So this should be this is prime. We definitely have to take advantage of this. I mean, that's obvious, but I agree with you there. Yeah.
Exactly. We can't leave it in the hands of the news media, because what's going to happen when these people are named and we find out they're all of a certain group? Well, the media is not going to really report on it anymore. I mean, we already see people like Ben Shapiro, for example, wrote an article on the Daily Wire saying why we shouldn't talk about Epstein. And we all know what his real reasoning is. He says like, we can't distract away from Trump or something, or the leftists are going to use it for something. But in all reality, we know why he's pushing against it. And the media will start pushing against it too once he starts naming names. We have to use the sort of mimetic warfare and the sort of persuasive tactics that we have to show, hey, this is this is real. This is something that goes on every time you go to watch, superhero movies, Marvel movies. This is what you're supporting innately. There needs to be some sort of reform that happens. And it crosses party lines completely. I mean, I don't see Democrats going to defend this guy, nor do I see hey Natty, you're kind of showing your face right now, bud. Or was that Memo Chess? Sorry
Hang
about
on.
that. Anyways.
What's up, yo? Sorry, go ahead.
All
hey,
right.
No. Hey, I wanted to. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
All right, you're fine. But just in the long short of things, yeah, we do need to utilize this because it's going to start being memory hold very soon. I predict that.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I mean, traditionally, historically, the only effective check against an out of control oligarchy has been a monarch, or you could say like a fascist dictator, right? And unless we have that, shit ain't changing, man. You can wake up. People have known that the government is corrupt for decades and decades, and as long as there's food in the grocery stores and television programming to numb your mind to, they're not going to do anything about it. And frankly, they can't. I don't expect them to. Like, do we really think that the American people are going to rise up and take up arms and, like, I don't know what would they do? Go attack all the heads of corporations and people living in Hollywood and people in their secret compounds in the Bahamas? I mean, the only effective way to deal with an oligarchy is with a monarch or dictator. And until we have that, all this is going to do is continue to sow further distrust in our governing institutions and our centers of authority. That's what's being attacked. That's what's eroding. And all that can lead to, in my view, is a dissolution of the Anglo-American empire. And the United States will break up into smaller areas. And I mean, that's what we're heading toward, unless there's some sort of unifying figure that comes along in the American context. But I mean,
well, that's what I mean.
Allergic to that in the
it is not going to be some, obviously we're not going to convince 50% of people that, yeah, we should be American nationalists. No, I do think it will be just a small group of people, maybe 2%, 3% of the United States. I mean, look at what 2% is doing already. It will just be a very small portion of the United States population that will be convinced of our ideals and take action. The point is that we just need to, my mission is to make the transition as peaceful as possible. I know a lot of people in the alt-right kind of take the black pill and they go, oh, the only solution is violence. Well, I don't really believe that. I think that for the most part, like you said, people generally don't care who's ruling them as long as they still get their TV and their movies and their food, and as long as there's still heat coming through the vents. That's why I think we need to just energize a small group of people with these very obvious messages, and we'll work through that, whether it's through subversion or other methods. I think that's what we need to do.
Hey, meat cutter.
Yeah, I mean, what is the end game? Like, we're trying to take political power in Washington, D.C. and take over the instrument of government. Is that what you're talking about? Is that what we're trying to do?
I would say that's what I would be aiming for.
Okay. I mean, that's a long, hard slog, my friend.
Well, I mean, so far everything that we have to do is, there's no way we can do anything without planning at least 50 years out.
Yeah.
So I think obviously this would be far off, but I think when you said making the transition as peaceful as possible, I understand the merit in that. Obviously it's a noble idea, but I think the tolerant, as Plato said in 200 BC, tolerance is the lube that lets slip the dildo of dysfunction into the ass of society. So, clearly tolerance has gotten us, in a very bad position. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean we go around killing all minorities, but clearly there are groups of people, for example, Satanists, that, we could easily justify violence on because, if we would gain power, clearly such groups would have no place in our new nation. For example.
Even so, I mean, trust me, I'm aware of just the worst dredges of society, man. I've watched the videos, I've attended the rallies of, just people doing the most disgusting things, the most demonic things that I've ever seen. To the point where, yeah, you might question whether they're even real people, real humans anymore. But even so, perhaps I might be a little bit cucked on this and your guys' perspective. I still think that we should try to maximize salvation to as many people as possible. And yes, while I agree for the death penalty for people who just cannot be saved, who cannot be reasoned with, they're just so solidified in their demonic ways that they just have to be put down. I would not say that we should take violence against Satanists outright, or even pro-abortionists or anything like that. Even abortion doctors, I wouldn't just say, oh, all should die, even though I think that most of them, if tried, probably would. I think that we probably shouldn't try to go that route.
Hey man, capital punishment is against the Catholic religion now. They changed the catechism, bro. You're not allowed to kill anyone.
No, that's not true. That's not true.
What? Pope Francis told me that.
No, it's no. If you look at the catechism, I know that trust me, I've had this conversation so many times. If
you have the 2017 catechism, you got to get updated, man.
No, if you look at the catechism, there's a little like asterisk there where it's like, while the death penalty is probably not necessary, it still is, allowed. So basically, Pope Francis, all he did was just interject his personal opinion. But the death penalty is still
getting around there. But
oh, all right. Okay, good. You're about to launch me into some autistic rant right there.
No, my dry sense of humor. I apologize.
Just want to give you all a heads up that unfortunately we're coming toward an hour here, so maybe give it another 5 minutes. I don't know if Meat Cutter or Natty or Larry, if you guys had anything else to, like, a little food for thought or devil's advocate questions, something to interject. Go for it.
I had a mischievous sort of objection that I just wanted to maybe address, and it's directed towards our guests. So yes, I'm definitely kind of seeing sort of the flavor of approach that you guys might find effective. I will say though that there are certain objections that people have raised, and you reference the alt-right or whomever is characterized as alt-right. One of the things that I bring up a lot is, and Reactionary Grounds has discussed this privately, is the question of something like the colonization of the Americas. This pertains both to kind of an assertion of identity and the kind of like when is force justified question. So it seems to me that something like that was only really possible with sort of a declaration and kind of acknowledgement that we, in this case, people coming from Europe, have a manifest destiny for this land, and in a way, us procuring it is something that is for the ultimate good of humanity. Now, in order to carry that out, in order to take that kind of abstract idea and execute it, there would have to be things that are done that are unpleasant. In particular, there was a clear sort of distinction of this is us, this is them, they have this, and we want to take it. Now, a pessimist might be like, well, a pessimist might say something like, well, this is kind of the state of affairs and always will be. It will always be exactly that, and there is no way to circumvent that. But certainly, this would be kind of a difficult thing for someone who says that maybe we should all kind of exist in our, homogeneous neighborhoods, and occasionally sort of wade out into the real world from 9 to 5, and then come back, into our shell, so to speak. But when you look at things pragmatically, it doesn't seem like they play out that way at all. What do you have any comments about that?
Yeah, I have some. To clarify my position, I don't think that violence is intrinsically evil. I think it can be very useful at its times. All social pressures, all cultural pressures are backed by the fist ultimately. Normally, I wouldn't say to go to violence immediately. I would say it's probably best as a last resort. For example, if you have someone who wants to engage in like homosexual acts or in race mixing or something like that, there should just be starting with shame and a little bit of a disgust from the average person. I do not think that like someone should say, oh, I think I might want to date that black guy. You just, wail the crap out of him with your rolling pin or something. But if you have people who are pushing this message of pro-abortion or pro-race mixing or pro-gay, then ultimately, yes, that has to be backed by the fist. You have to say, look, you have to stop this or we're going to destroy your studio. Or we're going to, or there might be some sort of gas leak, or, you might not have your dog when you get home. Something like that. And as brutal as that may sound, I think that's ultimately what is just necessary in going forward and in preserving societies. Now, of course, I would never advocate for violence of anyone. I love all people. And I think that everyone should just get along. I think we should all just play in a sandbox and just discuss our ideas in the marketplace of ideas. But in this hypothetical world that's totally not real that we've concocted in Minecraft, yeah, I would say that we would have to ultimately back things through violence. But I do not think that should be our main cause.
In a defense situation, merely a defense situation.
Yeah, merely defensive situations.
But didn't you just say a couple minutes ago that in a transition, there would be no room for violence?
No. I said in a transition, I would prefer that violence not happen. I would prefer that nonviolent options are always preferred over violent ones.
Well,
like
right,
I said, I want the most peaceful transition possible. And if there were to exist some possibility that we could transition entirely without violence, I would say that's worth pursuing. As much as I dislike these people, and as much as I think that they could possibly be demons on Earth, I still wouldn't want to say, well, let's put a bullet in them, even if we don't have to. But yeah, if violence is needed, then violence is needed.
See, because hypothetical scenario on my Minecraft server, right? If you've got these institutions that, let's say again, hypothetically, we have successfully instituted our reactionary revolution, right? If there would still be institutions that still maintain a strong footing, that actively refuse to drop their costs. For example, I don't know, any example, right? Any of the aforementioned groups. Obviously there would not be, it wouldn't be like, well, obviously maybe some people would jump at the notion that there's an opportunity to kill, but obviously in order to create a strong state, a strong nation, we wouldn't really go out to killing people. However, I think going back to something that either you or Sam had mentioned, the notion of trying to save as many people, or trying to universally save everyone, I think again that's a noble idea, but I think that wouldn't really be pragmatic, because again, time and resources spent trying to convert someone like a Satanist could much more easily be used trying to do something else.
I think I see where you're coming from in terms of like trying to instate the society, right? Like if we're actively working towards altering our society, yeah, maybe it's not the best idea to, waste resources trying to convert Satanists and pro-abortionists. Yes, I would agree with you there that ultimately, yeah, it has to just kind of be force But once the culture is secured, I don't know if that will ever happen, to be honest. But once we've kind of reached a point of plateau, I would say that continuing to just use violence is probably not the best idea. Now, whether that's possible or not, I have no idea. But I'd just say that would be the ideal in that circumstance.
Going back to converting either through religion or ideology, I know I've met a lot of people whose personal philosophies differ, but I'm more of a person that's willing to bring people that are right wing into the far right or third position movement. Similarly with religion, I am much more likely to pull Novus Ordo attending people into the Latin Mass, the traditional scene, as opposed to trying to get a Protestant to join Catholicism, something along the lines of that.
I see what you're saying, yeah. Because I mean that's just simply like the easiest route. It's much easier to get someone who basically agrees with your premises to agree with you on all the finer details, versus someone who doesn't even agree with your foundational principles.
And because it is, at the end of the day, because it is a numbers game, I feel like it's faster to go. And again, the only reason I'm mentioning this is because, as we've discussed, we really do need greater numbers in order to affect change, especially on the long run, right? I do think that some of the people that we might be looking at, for example, boomers in general, it would not be focusing time on them as opposed to just sort of, I guess, reinvigorating them as opposed to, looking at the youth, which are much more impressionable. So kind of in like this situation, right? Looking at centrists, looking at libertarians, obviously, or not obviously, but in my opinion, I think they'd be the last, or, Protestants. I get Protestants in regards to sort of how religion interacts with culture and cultural values. I think they would be. I think maybe ultimately, we'd need them, but if we're trying to grow numbers of a brand that subscribed to traditional Christianity and right-wing third positionist politics, I think that would be, or sorry, far right third positionist politics. I think those would be, too far-fetched. Useful term.
I see what you're saying, but also you kind of have to look at it through the eyes of an NPC or a normal person. When I talk to any of my friends who are either like kind of just lukewarm Christians or secular or atheists, their knowledge and their comprehension of theology and the differences between the denominations is like bafflingly stupid. I mean, you could ask them, hey, what's the difference between a Baptist and an Episcopalian, and they probably won't have even heard of those denominations. So ultimately, yes, I would prefer that everyone becomes Catholic because, I believe that the church is the true way to salvation, the only way to salvation. But like I said, when we were talking before the show started, I would not mind at least getting people to Protestantism, at least getting people to understand, okay, God's real, metaphysical laws exist, the Trinity exists, those sort of basic, like Christianity 101 tier principles and ideas.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I see your point.
Okay, so we're about out of time here, but Meat Cutter hasn't really spoken up much. He's been listening. I don't know if he wants to interject a thought or a question or a point, and then so he'll be the final question or point if he's got one, and then against Degeneracy and Sam, you guys can give the final answers or rebuttals or what have you, and then we'll close it down.
Sure thing.
Yeah, I'm preoccupied with a couple things tonight other than this. But anyways, now with Jess, I remember you mentioned a bit about federal politics, getting involved with politics on a federal level as being kind of pointless, as the American empire is indeed crumbling. But I was curious to hear your thoughts on local politics as sort of a rallying cry for our ideas and as a means of unifying our people for at least local control, so as to bring our community more into the real world.
Yeah.
Rather than just off the internet. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, yeah. I think you should definitely network and get involved in local politics, because as the national infrastructure crumbles, you'll want to have those connections in place and ready, so you're already one of the go-to guys when local government becomes much more of a necessity than it is now. I do think we'll see a return to something like states' rights, though I don't think it will be a clean return. I think it'll happen out of necessity because of a crisis at the federal level. So definitely get involved with your local politics and network with those people so that you're ready to go and can be a person of influence when the time comes.
Against degeneracy, any further thoughts on that?
Yeah, I basically agree with what Sam Menlich just said. Yeah, I do believe that local politics are probably where you're going to find, honestly, the most like-minded people around you. I don't think that's where the starting point is. And so if you're going to try to network with anyone, your local politicians are your best bet. And you're also the most likely to win elections. I mean, how many people really vote for some of these positions like drain commissioner? Like 5. I mean, you're going to rise up in the ranks pretty quickly if you're trying to get into local politics.
All right.
Good deal. Okay, gentlemen. So that, I suppose, wraps it up for our first.
Just to interject, I forgot. I don't think we ever really did our intros or where to find us.
Oh yeah. I do apologize if I had that oversight there. Yeah. So we have Against Degeneracy here on Facebook right now. I believe your main page is Against Degeneracy 2. Am I right?
Yeah, you can find me at www.facebook.com/anti-degenerate. Or if you just type in Against Degeneracy, I'll probably be the first page that pops up.
Yeah, it's Against Degeneracy, and it's 2 as in the Roman numeral 2. If you type that in on Facebook in the search. And then Men with Chest, you're also on Facebook. Are you on Twitter as well, Men with Chest, Sam?
I got it all, man. I got Facebook. I have Twitter. I'm on Twitch. I'm on VK. What else do I have? I'm on everything. But most of my activity goes over on Facebook. And then I also have a podcast. You can find that on Stitcher, iTunes, Spotify. I got an RSS feed on my website, menwithchests.site. is where you want to go to find that. Got our latest episodes, and we'll be starting up again after an extended hiatus tomorrow night. I'll be interviewing a Catholic meme lord, edgelord, so that'll be fun. And I also want to say that as a final closing statement, European people built a great civilization because they were being used by God's providence to spread the social kingship of Christ. And to the extent that they cooperated with that providence, they were blessed with prosperity and abundance and power and luxury. They let it go to their heads. They abandoned God's providence. And as a result, their civilization has crumbled around them. They're cursed. That's why we're suffering what we're suffering, in my humble opinion.
I agree. I have to say that one thing I've said behind the scenes with some of our co-hosts is that when Europe faced its biggest existential threats in the form of the Moors, the Moorish invasion, the Muslims, what unified them was not whiteness. What unified them was Christendom. And so we really need to return to God. I have to agree with you. And I will also say that I believe this stream has been blessed. I think it's been blessed because in spite of the incredible power outage, which almost prevented our stream here from happening. It made it run 25 minutes late, but did a prayer at the last minute, asked God for help to allow the stream to happen, and right after the prayer finished, power came back on. So I think we may be blessed in spite of the efforts of our Fed overlords. Our
divine intervention.
Indeed. And I also see, I didn't realize this before we got on the stream, but Against Degeneracy, Men with Chest, you guys are both traditional Catholics, and everybody here, Natty, Philippe, Meat Cutter, myself, Big Mac, and we're all traditional Catholics. And Larry, well, he's Greek Orthodox, but about the closest thing you can come to being a Catholic order. So this is a very edified podcast. So I think it's got good outlook.
Yep, for sure.
So, gentlemen, really appreciate you coming on. We will be here next week, Sunday. If the power stays on, it'll be 9:30 p.m. like we always plan to do it, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here at the channel. hope to have Against Degeneracy and Men with Chests on with us again, and hopefully as well a couple other guests. So, friends, bring your families and tune in. And God bless, gentlemen.
Yep, I just want to say thanks for having me on, and I'm happy to come back at any other time.
Great.
Yeah, it was
thanks,
lovely
man. I
having you guys
appreciate it.
on. Thanks a lot.
Sounds good, gents. Talk to you soon. God bless.
Godspeed.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye.